Ladies and gentlemen, we have yet more information on the PlayStation 4 from the GDC, which of course was the development conference that Sony have been so happy about. Now, SCEA Senior Staff Engineer Chris Norden has been there to speak to games developers as well as members of the press, and he's been letting us know what has changed on the PlayStation 4, what new features we can expect, how the hardware works, and various other bits and pieces. So before we get into the GPU, CPU, RAM, and all the other performance aspects of the console, basically, let's talk about the more mundane features. Well, I don't really want to use the word mundane, since we're going to be using them all the time, and that, of course, is the control methods. Now, it's not that the PlayStation series has ever had crappy controls. There were a few letters of discontent, shall we say, with the PlayStation 3, specifically on the actual triggers. I found them to be a bit of a pain in the butt on certain games, although there were ways to improve them. But apparently the PlayStation 4 pad has, or shall we say the DualShock 4, has gone under numerous changes. Now, to be honest with you, most of the pads, if you were to have gone from, say, the PlayStation 2 pad to PlayStation 3, other than the wire being removed, it looks very similar. There's not that much difference. And indeed, even the original, of course, DualShock 1 pad for the PlayStation back in the day. Other than the original digital one, which of course didn't have the sticks, once you start to add the sticks, not that much a change. You know, there were a few things here and there, but fundamentally, the core design was very similar. This is, of course, been thrown out the window for the PS4. That's not to say that it's completely different in that, you know, it looks like the Wii controller from, say, the GameCube, but it is quite different, and the control and precision has been ramped up quite a bit. Obviously, you've got the obvious removals, which would be the start and select button, and now, of course, you've got the options/share replacement as well. However, there have been a number of other changes. I've never actually disliked analog control on the PlayStation pads, and the great thing is that it's improved actually on the PlayStation 4, which is absolutely fantastic. We have much better precision as well as much better dead zone, supposedly anyway. Another point that I think some of you may care about, me not so much as I've never really liked it, would be the vibration functionality. As I've said, I've never really been that into vibration on pads. I've always personally found it distracting. But back in the days of the DualShock 3, there was two motors, and one was smaller, one was larger, and they were analog. Well, supposedly analog anyway, in that you can adjust their speed. In other words, it was either max or, well, not max. Sorry, it's either max, in other words, on, or, well, off. It's that simple. It's on and off switch. Now, it has been changed so that the actual vibration can be defined by the developer themselves. So, in other words, if there's only a very slight amount required, then, well, the developers can easily, code that into the games. Another point that has been massively upgraded is the motion sensor. That's not to say that the one on the PlayStation 3 sucked. It just, I wouldn't want to say the word afterthought, but it certainly wasn't the point of the controller existing, if that makes sense. However, there has been some significant improvements on the PlayStation 4 derivative, and I'm going to be using the word significant improvements, or should I say the phrase significant improvements, quite a lot throughout the video, so you better get used to it. The motion sensor, and the accelerometers, and there's a 6-axis accelerometer and gyroscope. It's much better than the one in the PlayStation 3, by the way, and indeed has been improved over the one in the PlayStation Vita. Not that the one in the PlayStation Vita was bad, it's just, well, this is better. Speaking of things that are better, and things on PlayStation Vita, you may remember that there's a touchscreen on the controller of the PlayStation 4. The good news is that the resolution on this thing is very high indeed. It's actually 1920 by 900 in terms of resolution. And to say that that's good is an understatement. We already know that certain games are going to really rely upon this functionality. And I never expected it to suck. To be honest with you, whenever I'm listening to the specifications of the PlayStation 4, I don't think that they're going to be bad. You know how I've had a few concerns over the power of the CPU. I've been quite vocal on that. And I'm not, biased to one group or the other, but whenever I hear Sony have done something with the PlayStation 4, I always take it that they've probably made a pretty good decision, because they've already admitted, I'm going to be doing a separate video on this, some concerns they had with the PlayStation 3 back when it was in development, and this certainly doesn't seem to be the case with the PS4. Now another point that a few people have wrote to me, various messages on both Facebook and actual YouTube, and you know you guys are free to do that whenever you want. I can usually, if I don't have enough information, I'll just give you a message back of my opinion. I don't like to do videos when it's very heavy speculation on a kind of a small point, especially if there's been no mention of it, usually anyway. But on regards to the voice chat and the headset situation of the PlayStation 4, we do actually have some more concrete information. The great news is that there will be a headset that will ship in every single PlayStation 4 box. So in other words, when you come to buy your PlayStation 4, no matter which version you get, assuming there will be multiple versions, you buy your PlayStation 4 and there will be a headset in there. And the great news as well is it's going to be a high quality one. Indeed, I'm going to give a quote of Norden, just so you can get an idea of what he's coming from, where he's coming from, shall I say. Sorry guys, I probably will misspeak a little bit. I am actually extremely tired. I went out late last night and went for a meal for a friend's birthday, and I came home and then just didn't sleep well at all, and then I had work. And then I've been doing virtual servers all day, so I'm very tired. Anyway, as I was saying, the quote, shall I say, everybody has asked about it, and it definitely helps out with voice chat, multiplayer games and everything, so we decided to go ahead and just do that. It has got a 32 kHz stereo output for 2-player. Its frequency will only be reduced slightly when you start cranking up the number of players, and this is because of the bandwidth of the wireless. And there's also a 16 kHz microphone, as well. The speaker is the same high quality output as the headset, and it streams directly from the PS4 at runtime. Now, some of you, and some of you may or may not be aware, that there was actually an analog response on the actual face buttons, but also on the D-pad and the L1 and L2 buttons. Some of you may be aware of that, some of you may not, and the reason I say may not is not to your detriment. It's just to say that it wasn't particularly popular. There were 1 or 2 games that did use them, but most of them just didn't. And so Sony have said, hey, you know what, this is actually using bandwidth. This is using bandwidth on, the wireless, and wireless communications are a precious commodity in terms of the pure bandwidth, as most things are, to be honest. Most things in technology usually come down to how quickly you can move data from point A to point B. And so they've said, you know what, this stuff is almost to the point of being superfluous, we're just going to go ahead and remove it. And they've done that. And so they've gone back to digital, so in other words, the on and off, and this has done very good things. Basically, that was increasing the latency, it was increasing the packet size, in other words, the size of the data being transferred. And so now they've reduced it, they don't need to worry about it, and pretty much, this means that the controller now is more responsive, it's faster, and feels nicer in the hand. In other words, you don't have to have the excuse of, what the hell, my controller lagged on me, bro. Now, there are also a couple of kind of cool features, and this is mostly to do with the light bar on the controller, and it is actually used to track your location in the room. So in other words, it takes note of your position relative to the console, and it's actually kind of one that I wouldn't have called, and that is, Norden was talking about dynamic split screen. So let's assume that we're talking about the player on the left, or shall we say the left-hand side of the screen. Now, normally, as you guys will probably be familiar, if you're player 1, then you automatically get a certain quadrant of the screen, so in other words, usually on the left-hand side. Now, what's going to happen is, if you're sitting on the left, you're going to get the left side. If you're sitting on the right, you're going to get the right side, but that's not dynamic, right? Well, it's somewhat dynamic, but the real cool thing is, let's say you were to get up and get a drink, or have to go pee or something, and then one of your friends steals your seat, so you have to then sit on the opposite side. Well, guess what? That's right, the screen actually updates. Now, just like the PlayStation Move, there isn't just one color. If you manage to snag first player, then you'll get this very traditional blue color. That, of course, would be the one that you always see on pictures of the PlayStation 4 controller. Then, if you're second player, you'll get a different color still, and that would be red. Whereas, on the other hand, if you're third player, you get green, and on the other hand, if you're the fourth player, you get pink. Where did they get those colours, I hear you cry? Well, that would be on the face of the actual buttons. If you actually look at the PlayStation, 4 symbols, if you will, or indeed the PlayStation symbols, they are, of course, right there. So I guess it's kind of symbolic of the console. What's kind of nice as well, by the way, is that the devs actually have control, somewhat anyway, of the LEDs. So, for example, let's say you smack your friend in a boxing game, for example, you'll notice that his light could indeed start flashing, or flash quickly. Speaking of flash, it will also flash when it's being charged as well. Oh, and speaking of charging, the pad can indeed charge while the console's on standby. So there's no need to worry about, I need my system on to charge or whatever. It will be fine and charge while you're on standby. Kind of expected in this day and age, but still, just a nice point anyway. Now, there also has been some hinting of Kinect-style gameplay, and has said that the PlayStation 4 would support controller-free gameplay, as well as custom props. Indeed, to give you a quote, he said, "You can get a really good lock on items in the room. Cards, AR markers, wristbands, clothing, LEDs, anything you can think of, you can track. LEDs work really well because it's a nice constant light source, but you can do pretty much anything." And yes, I can imagine lightsabers already being made. And how is all of this done? Well, fortunately, the PlayStation 4i provides a much better tracking than the PS3 camera. And let's go really quickly into the specifications of that. Now, in terms of the actual camera, we know that the cameras themselves, both cameras, will be using a 1280 by 800, or should I say per camera, just want to clarify that. And that will be with 12-bit color precision, and they will indeed operating in 60 Hz refresh. So you can ensure nice, accurate movement grabbing, shall we say. Now, developers do have some control over this, though. They don't necessarily have to worry so much about resolution. And as I was saying beforehand, in terms of the bandwidth on, say, the controllers, developers can say, hey, you know what, we don't need this resolution. We need the frame rate. We need to actually go for update speed. And in this case, at its maximum speed, the PlayStation 4i can actually update at a rather astounding 240 Hz. Now, the good news is the cameras do seem to be able to be used for 3D applications. So, as I was saying, you can actually triangulate the depth. However, that isn't the only things, of course, they can be used for, such as, say, much better low-light performance. Strangely enough, the actual camera comes with a 6-axis accelerometer and has an 85-degree field of view. But the sensor will feed back into the PlayStation 4 and will let the console know which direction the camera is looking. And if it thinks, you know what, this game isn't really getting a good image of what you guys are doing, it'll actually allow the developers to prompt the players into saying, hey, you need to move the camera, my friend, because we're just not really understanding the movements you're making, which is quite a nice touch. What about CPU core speed? I know what you're going to say. Well, we don't know that. Of course, we're jumping into the hardware side of things. What we do know from AMD side of things in terms of architecture is that it is, and I quote, low power consumption, low heat, 8 cores, 8 hardware threads. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times that sometimes GPUs, with their parallel processing, should I say, is much better than CPUs for tasks. And the great thing, and I'll quote here, is that Norden has said that extremely carefully balanced compute architecture And so, as you know, the PlayStation 4 has 18 compute units, and these cores can be used in various ways. Now, as I was mentioning previously as well in another video, I believe it's the APU one, the APU, the purpose of the Jaguar, is that it has very good and easy access to the memory, which of course is the DDR5 with the 176 gigabytes of bandwidth. Now, in this case, the compute units can do many other things, which would be, of course, something like DSP algorithms. DSP, by the way, would be digital signal processing. So, even post-processing, anything that you wouldn't really say, hey, this is what graphics are made of, in other words, something like a texture. You know, you'd expect a texture for, you know, something like a GCN core to do, well, not necessarily. And, of course, if it doesn't have to rely on, I'm talking about the CPU, if it doesn't have to do all of this stuff, then that's absolutely fantastic from the point of view of developers, because obviously compute units can do things a lot faster. Now, obviously, the APU runs, well, obviously it's AMD, and it, of course, uses OpenCL or other languages, mostly OpenCL. Now, typically with most systems, if you want to get good graphics performance or good compute performance, you have to suspend the other one. In other words, if you want good graphics, you have to say, hey, you know what, sorry brother, we're going to have to stop, you know, all these compute tasks. But the good news is on the PlayStation 4, thanks of course to the AMD APU, and no, of course, small thanks to the GCN cores, as well as the Jaguar, as well as, of course, even Sony's own architecture, such as the amount of memory bandwidth, for example, they have. But now, of course, that's not the case. The problem, of course, with a lot of games is that, well, shall we say any games, or any visual medium, is that ultimately pretty explosions on screen and so on sell a lot better in terms of box art than what good physics does. It's that simple, really. Physics and other items do look very, very cool in motion. The problem is they don't really sell on box art and for snippet teasers and that type of thing. So good graphics are definitely what's going to help sell the console. Now the good news is, it does seem, contrary to the rumours that were going about early rumours were saying that the PlayStation 4 was going to be using 14 compute units for rendering, in other words, graphical effects, whereas on the other hand, the other 4, so that would of course bring it up to the 18 total, were going to be allocated to compute functionality. However, it seems that this isn't necessarily what they're going to be doing, and all 18 appear to be in a unified kind of architecture. Bear in mind, however, that the idea of running compute and rendering simultaneously does typically, or at least possibly, give the impression that they are going to somewhat do a divider there, but maybe that's just going to be arbitrary. Maybe it's, for example, down to the point of view of software houses. I think that's going to be very down to, I think we're going to have to kind of see really what they're going to be doing with that. Now, I think one of the big problems that many of you guys are starting to understand in my videos now is that general hardware is a hell of a lot harder to program for. One of the issues with drivers, for example, games on PC, should I say, is that often you're going to get poorer performance, and eventually graphics card manufacturers will release drivers. For example, the latest NVIDIA drivers have massively improved the performance on, say, Tomb Raider or Bioshock Infinite, and developers themselves will release patches on games which will improve performance. It's just the nature of things, really. It's very difficult to program for well, and more to the point, not only program well in terms of performance, but also in terms of neatness, in terms of error-free code and fast code as well. There's a difference between programming elegantly and it works, and programming just kind of every possible contingency in there and it works. And the problem, of course, with the every possible contingency approach is that often you're wasting resources, which is one of the ways, of course, they keep eking more power out of consoles, because eventually the code becomes a lot more elegant. It's certainly not the only way, but I'm, of course, not going to talk about every single way in this video. However, on the PlayStation 4, there's a very, very good thing indeed. Now, the console will be using DirectX 11 as well as OpenGL. However, Sony have already stated in this conference that we are, and I quote, "We are significantly we can significantly enhance performance by bypassing a lot of the artificial DirectX limitations and bottlenecks that are imposed, so DirectX can work across a wide range of hardware. As an aside, by the way, completely off the PlayStation topic just for a moment, apparently the next generation Xbox is also going to have hardware-specific extensions on top of the standard DirectX 11, so it's kind of got a workaround too. Now, what basically this means is that you need a hardware, or should I say, a development environment that is flexible, so you've got the ability to get your code up and running and mess around a little bit, but quickly as well, so you can get something that's kind of on the table and at least you can play around with. But also you want the option for developers who really want to push the console to get the most out of it as possible. So for that end, there are actually two rendering APIs. API, by the way, stands for Application Programming Interface. I just like to sometimes say what the acronym is. So one of those is a very low-level API. So you're pretty much talking directly to the hardware. There's no sugarcoating here. It's used to draw the static RAM buffers and feed them directly to the GPU. It's much lower level than what you're used to with, say, DirectX 11 or OpenGL. However, it's not quite driver level. What they're basically saying is it's very similar to, say, the PlayStation Vita or possibly the PS3 in terms of the graphics libraries and how they function. So developers who are used to that, they're going to be kind of able to hit the ground running. Sony have also said that there's what is known as wrapper AI. Now this wrapper AI, that would be the type, let's say you would wrap a present in and not, you know, AMC Hammer or something. And this wrapper AI would be more closely resembling to, say, a standard PC rendering API. Now, that doesn't mean that you're sacrificing efficiency. It doesn't mean you're necessarily sacrificing performance. It just basically shields you, if you will, from a lot of the mundane tasks that you would have to normally do over and over again, and with a lot of the repetitiveness, so to speak. Now, as I was saying, Sony seem to be extremely supportive of developers, and this is the case definitely with this wrapper, because the great thing is that Sony have stated that the idea is to simplify development, and indeed they're actually providing the developers the source code. So if, for example, the developers say, hey, you know what, we actually don't really like how this is going, or this doesn't fit our project, or we need to change something here to really get into this, you can actually do that, and then you can code it to suit your project, but at least you've got a kind of framework to build upon. Now, on the subject of bandwidth, and it seems to be my buzzword for today, you guys know that there's 176 gigabytes of theoretical bandwidth on the GDDR5 RAM. However, it seems, from what we're hearing, that not all parts of the PlayStation 4 are treated equally, so to speak. There are various sources that are going around, and one is actually saying the CPU is constrained to about 20 gigabytes per second. Now that's not bad, that's actually still fairly good. It's around 2/3 of the bandwidth available on, say, Ivy Bridge, which is one of the next generation Intel, although Haswell is coming out just after that. But still, 20 gigabytes per second is more than respectable. It really depends upon how you want to interpret what Sony are saying. For example, because it's unified, you could say that either 176 gigabytes is the maximum level of bandwidth across the entire system, or that it's the maximum amount of bandwidth, or should I say, it's the unified bandwidth across all components, so it's very difficult to kind of know what they're talking about at this point. Now, just in case I get any messages and to preempt that, about how that's going to stack up with the Xbox 720, it seems, judging from the white papers that are going around, that the CPU of Durango also is going to be having similar things, in that there's going to be lower levels of bandwidth on the CPU than what it does with the graphics core. And to be honest with you, if you were to look at the architecture of PCs, as I said earlier, Ivy Bridge is looking at about 30 gigabytes per second, give or take a few, pennies here or there. And this is paling in comparison to something like, let's go with the AMD Radeon 7970, which hits well over 200 gigabytes per second without any trouble at all. a very small aside. Of course, we do have the 3 times faster than the PlayStation 3 Blu-ray drive, and that is going to be 50 gigabytes. Not exactly anything shocking there. I think we all guessed that that was going to be the case. Now, if I had one major complaint about the PlayStation 3, it wasn't even the PlayStation Network outage. It wasn't even the console itself. In terms of the graphics were a little bit worse in some cases than the Xbox, and it wasn't really the programming, because I'm not programming for it. No offense to anyone who is, but it doesn't really affect me too much. But one thing that really did annoy me, and that would be the way that the console would just kind of get in the way at times, and that would mostly be the way that the system updated, it handled various downloads and other bits and pieces. There was not much more frustrating for me than when I'm downloading a demo or I've got a game update, so on, that I can't do anything. My system's just there, sat, installing. And what really used to annoy me about the PS3 is that it was very slow with the update all the time as well. And considering that I've got a 120 megabyte connection, it's even worse, because the download would, download quickly enough for the most part, but then I'd have to wait a ridiculous amount of time. What seems like it anyway, when you're itching for a game and you've only got half an hour before you have to go out or something, and then you've got to wait 10 minutes for this damn thing to install. It's frustrating. However, with the PlayStation 4, it's not going that route. If you guys are familiar with, say, the way Blizzard do a lot of their games, World of Warcraft, StarCraft would be great examples of this, then you'll probably have a good idea of how this is going to work. The basic premise is that developers have a choice of how they segment and split the game up into chunks, if you will. So let's say, for example, that they put the base code in and, all the stuff in to get them to a certain point in the game, say past character creation, if assuming you do have character creation in the game. Let's say, for example, the first few levels. Let's say, for example, you're playing an FPS game. That's a great example. And in an FPS game, for example, they could make it so that online's not available, single player is, on the first chunk I'm talking about, and this is a pure example. And, the first level's available because it's downloaded, or the first 1 or 2 levels are available. Let's say, each one takes 20 minutes to download, and, each one takes 20 minutes to play through. So let's say it's 2 available. It downloads the cutscene for each. It makes those unskippable, by the way, unless you've got the whole thing. This is a pure example. And it knows it's going to take 40 minutes to go through the whole thing, and it was going to download the rest of the chunks as and when. It doesn't need to download the architecture for level 4, say 7. When you're only on level 1, it's just no point. And say some of the textures may be different as well, and obviously the conversations with the characters, you get the idea. So it's going to be kind of set up in chunks, and if the game does need something specifically, I suppose it could always pull it from the server. Now, all this is great in theory, but the problem is reality. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen. It's just that connection speed. Another example would be that he would like to see live streaming gameplay and allowing other players to comment in real time. So, for example, as you're playing game X, your buddies can commentate on your stuff. The problem here is that in reality, most people's uploads are not that great in terms of the upload speed. Interestingly, it also seems that live streaming doesn't just focus upon the gameplay and upon what you're doing on screen. There's also going to be the ability to video stream from the PlayStation Eye as well, and you can put that in a picture-in-picture format as well in, say, the top right-hand corner. Kind of similar, I suppose, to, say, a scare cam on, say, Amnesia, of course, what Amata would do and many other Amnesia players. Now, the one good thing is that if you've already recorded this footage and you just need to upload it, you can put the PlayStation 4 on standby, and the very low power ARM processor in the system will actually be uploading that in just enough power, basically just powering up enough components to let the thing upload, so you're going to be using very minimal amounts of power. And also, on the subject of user interfaces, it seems that they're going to be very much focusing on things such as recommendations. So if you like something, then you can recommend it to your buddies. This is, of course, not exactly new. Steam does this, for example, but it's very effective. Sony are also hoping that developers will integrate certain social features. So, for example, let's say it's a decision-making game, say Heavy Rain or Infamous or whatever. If you've got a decent friends list, you'll be able to see who makes which decisions. So, for example, if there's a scene on, say, the next Heavy Rain that allows you to see, oh, I don't know, someone saved someone, someone killed someone, or someone let someone die, you'll be able to see what they did, what your friends did rather, compared to you. I'm not particularly sure this is a massive feature or anything, but it'll be make some interesting social experiments if nothing else. So I think that just about does it in this particular video. There's a lot of stuff. I honestly hoped for some more specifics on the CPU. I kind of expected a little bit more talk over the actual maybe performance of the machine, but honestly, the system's not released yet, and I have a feeling they're going to save a lot of this stuff until after Microsoft make some announcements, because obviously right now Microsoft are kind of just sitting back and enjoying the show, as well, maybe not enjoying the show depending on how good their console is. Right now, the console war, I've said this many times in dozens of videos, but still, I think this console war, and by the console war I'm of course talking about the 2013 to 2014, because it's definitely going to go over a couple of years. You've got the Wii U, you've got the PlayStation 4, you've got the Xbox 720, you've got the Steam Box and its derivative. PC gaming is absolutely kicking ass right now. And then you've got the Android consoles that are coming out. And don't forget, of course, one of my, well, not one of my, but one of the dark horses in the race, which would be the Androids and the iPhones and various other devices that, with the handheld market, which just seems to be really gaining ground right now. Graphics, of course, are improving all the time. Now we're seeing pretty much 4 cores to be the standard on a lot of smartphones, and 8 cores and so on are definitely going to become the normal over the next couple of years. And so that's going to really put a difficulty in, say, the Vita market, for Sony anyway. And even Nintendo, of course, which have been struggling, well, at least were struggling to sell the 3DS. Anyway, I think that's just about all of it. As I said, guys, I'm sorry for some misspeaking in this particular video. I'm extremely tired. I need to edit this and still somehow play BioShock later, so that's going to be an interesting experience. What else was I going to say? Yes, we've reached over 1 million views. I will be doing an official vlog on that probably over the next day or two. I was planning on doing it today, but I'm not a pretty sight. I have some pretty big bags under my eyes, so I'll leave that until tomorrow. But if you're a regular viewer, I just really want to thank you guys for all the support. It's incredibly good to have over 1 million views. I've actually been like this for a couple of days in reality, but YouTube just didn't tick over, and so I didn't want to make any announcements. What else? Oh yes, and check out our competition from Spoony Kipper. You guys may watch this video after the competition ends, but if not, go ahead and check it out regardless. I can't remember the date it ends. I didn't post the video, and I don't remember what date he told me, so sorry about that, but I imagine it'll be running for the next 10 days or so as our tradition. And that is with a fantastic Final Fantasy giveaway. It's not exactly one of a kind in that there's no more of these in the whole world, but it's not exactly a normal thing either, and it's a very nice physical giveaway, by the way. It's an actual physical item that he's going to be sending you, so it's very, very worth it if you're into Final Fantasy. Anyway, as I said, I think that's just about everything in this particular video. Sorry I've been a bit all over the shop, as I said. Hopefully normal service when I'm not quite so sleep deprived will be returning tomorrow. I was supposed to be going out tonight, but sod that with how much sleep I've had. Anyway, take care and bye for now. Have a great night, shall I say.